giving you useful and practical tips to help you make more money selling travel. This is the Art of Selling Travel Podcast, and here to guide you through it all, your host, Glenda Beagle.
Okay, guys, you are never going to guess what we're going to talk about today. I am absolutely thrilled. We have a two-time author on the episode today. Renee Tsang is a travel advisor here in Canada, and she's written two of the very best books I've ever seen talking about how to sell Disney. And while they're definitely for the consumer, I'm going to tell you, if you were an advisor looking to get into selling Disney, maybe you've been selling it for a while and you're still just not 100%, or you're maybe wanting to up your game. Trust me, you're going to want to go grab these books. But in the meantime, welcome, Renee. Hello.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here. And I'm so honored that you invited me to be a part of your podcast.
Well, I'm excited. You know, I've known about your books for a little while. And when we were having our conversation and I got a chance to actually sit down and read them, first, let's just address the elephant in the room. It's not very often you see a book or even just content of this caliber from somebody who doesn't live in either California or Orlando. And let's be honest, you live in Canada.
Yes. Yeah. And that's where, again, like part of the book was just to be able to provide a specialty for Disney travel. But, I don't have the luxury of living close to the parks to visit often enough or as often as I would like. There's a lot of other agents that can visit a lot more often to gain different experiences. And that's amazing. But I think this way, it's just a different way of setting myself apart from some of the other Disney travel agents out there. And there are a lot of them, and I'm sure they all have their own ways of setting themselves apart too.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things as I was going through it, I'm like, where have you been all of my Disney selling life? Like, we're going to get into some of the tips that she's got a little bit later on. But, let's start with your first book. So it's nearly 200 pages, people. Like, it's not just a throwaway flyer. It is like meaty. And it's called I'll Never Grow Up: The Bare Necessities of Planning Your Disneyland Vacation. First off, I love the title. I love the whole idea of I'll never grow up. Where did you get that title from?
That's a little bit of me, a little bit of Disney. It's the Peter Pan complex that that's where it kind of came from. But at the same time, I think there's a part of me, and I'm sure for a lot of adults too, is there's that inner child that sometimes we forget as we grow up and get inundated with adult responsibilities and requirements and all the stuff that we need to do. We forget how to be a kid. We forget how to enjoy things for what they are. And the thing about Disneyland is it's nostalgic for a lot of different reasons, but it is truly a place for adults to go and just be a child again and experience things with the same eyes of a child kind of thing. So that's kind of where the title came from. And part of it too was the Disneyland experience is different at every stage of your life. So even if you've been before or if you've never been before, there's always different things that come with it. And again, seeing everything through the innocence, childlike manner is just something that I'm very passionate about. And I want people to have that experience in the way that it was meant to, the way that Walt Disney designed Disneyland to be.
That's awesome. And I'm just going to chase a squirrel for a second here. Mm-hmm. When we went to Disneyland as a family, when we only went now since I've been in travel, we've gone more. But as a family growing up, we went one time. It was for my sister's high school graduation. And it was Disneyland's 35th anniversary. I refuse to look at how many years it's been now, but I remember our hoodies and our sweatshirts and all the tacky tourist stuff that you buy, and it all says Disney's 35th anniversary. But the thing is that years later, when I got into travel, I remember the office that I worked for at the time. She was supposed to go on a trip to Disneyland, and she sent me instead. It was with one of our tour operators, so it was a fam. And I got there, and I remember calling my mom on a payphone from Disneyland and saying, "Oh my God, Disney is insane. And she's like, well, yeah. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like where the paint was missing all those years ago, it's still missing. That's how they painted it. And so it was like this this travel loop where suddenly I was back to being, I don't know, what was I, like 10 or 11 back then?
Right.
And it was this instant teleportation back in time.
Yeah.
And so perhaps you're an advisor who you went as a child and you're like, oh, I could never sell it because there's so much to it. And I wouldn't know what anything looks like. This is the thing about Disney. They're constantly changing, constantly evolving. But then there's going to be places, particularly in the Magic Kingdom, where nothing has changed in the least. Yet, if you looked at their spreadsheets and their data and everything else, I'm sure they could tell you millions of things that they've changed.
Yes.
But that's the magic of Disney.
Exactly. It's got both parts where it's always changing, constantly evolving. So then even if you went, doesn't matter how long ago it was, guaranteed there'll be something different. There'll be lots of things different, enough to keep you busy for however long your trip is. But then at the same time, there's that static something that remains the same, that like takes you back in time, that takes you back to a childhood, or it doesn't matter how many times you walk through those gates or walk down Main Street or see the castle again, it feels like the first time. Doesn't matter how many times you've been there, it feels like the first time.
Right. So. And I've been now to Disneyland 4 times, I think. And I've been to Disney World once. And while I'm from Alberta as well, so West Coast is a little bit more my heart for Disney. Yes. And that's where I started. I actually prefer Disneyland over Disney World, but don't get me wrong, Disney World's awesome, but there's just something about Disneyland. And I always kind of chuckle when I talk with other advisors and they're like, especially if they're more east and Florida, things like that. They're like, no, like Disney World, like Disneyland's just a little itty bitty park.
Yes.
And I'm like, but I like it. I don't need a bus to get where I'm going.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I think that, and I definitely see that with advisors that I know, or even just clients, where there's definitely an East versus West type of different perspective in how they see it. And Disneyland is much smaller. I mean, the whole park can fit into the parking lot of Magic Kingdom. Right. Like not even the park, like it's just the parking lot of Magic Kingdom. So size is huge in difference. However, doesn't necessarily mean there's any less of an experience. They're just totally different. Yeah. And so, I mean, one of the things that people love to ask is, which one do you prefer? Well, or which one is better? Or, you cannot ask those kinds of questions because there is no answer. There's so many different variables with it. But the thing that I always want to make sure I tell people about Disneyland is it's more than just a theme park. It's so much more than a vacation. It's definitely an experience on so many different levels that I really want people to see and experience Disneyland in the way that Walt Disney had intended it for. Right? It's more than just a vacation. It's more than all of that. There's lots of intentional. Everything is intentional. Like you said, like the missing paint. That was there for a reason. There's a story behind everything, and delving into it. Like, it's not just about rides or meeting characters or the shows. Like, all of that is amazing, but there are so many stories behind every door, everything, that if you wanted to delve into that, you could do, you could do that too, just to enhance that experience. That you don't have that the same way that Florida or Disney World has. So
absolutely. Absolutely. I did want to highlight, and I'm sure I read this in the first book. I was kind of like flipping back and forth between, which that was like a little Disney overload. But one of the things that you said in there, and I just want to highlight this because you said, and I'm highlighting it because I think this is so important for all advisors to hear and know and to incorporate that into their own world. Because you said something about why you don't see travel agents anymore and the idea of, do they exist? And you said many are working as independent consultants for larger agencies and they're all home-based. You don't necessarily see them as you normally would have in the past, walking through the mall or past a brick and mortar agency. Mm-hmm. And I think that was so important to include in the book, but then it also was kind of that trigger when I was reading it of how important it is for travel advisors to make sure that people understand that as well. Because we all hear, is that still a thing?
Yes.
Back in the day, sitcoms there was one, oh, and I can't think of the name of it. Actually, there's been a few of them, but there's one that popped up on my TV not too long ago that the lead character was actually a travel agent and working in like a tower, like it was quite the thing. And,
Yeah.
you know, and if you look back at sitcoms through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, they were always, oh, I got to call the travel agent. Let's do this. Let's call the travel agent. I don't hear that as much on TV anymore. And I think that's partly because Hollywood's forgotten that we exist too. So reframing that conversation, like what you did in your book, I think is so important. And that simple paragraph, I think should almost be a part of a lot of people's marketing, and just say, so you don't think we exist anymore? That's because you can't see us, you know, and we're behind the scenes. You actually had a phenomenal whole section in there about why to use a travel advisor and the specializing and all of the things. And like you said, it's no longer just about logistics. It's about enhancing the experience and things like that. And I absolutely loved it. I love that you included that in the book. So
thank you.
Before we get into the other book, I just got to ask, what drove you to writing a book? Like, you are a mom, you have a full-time job, and you sell travel, and you do this. How on earth did you find time to write a book or two books?
Well, I guess I guess I'll take it a couple steps back just to kind of beginning of the journey of everything. But that was one of those things in my life bucket list that I wanted to do, is I just wanted to write a book. Initially, I thought I was going to write a children's book telling a fun story. You know, when my kids were young, I thought, you know what, I could write a children's book. I mean, it doesn't look like it's that complicated. Ha ha ha. Well, and then apparently there's probably a lot more that goes into it. But I think it was just always a goal that I'd wanted to write a book, and it was one of those things that I kind of put on the back burner, eventually would get to, and then one day just kind of like, I really need to do this. I really want to do this. And so I kind of set a goal for myself and decided I'm going to do it. And it was more of just a passion project type of a thing. I didn't really have any specific goals for it, other than I just wanted to do this for myself, to have a tangible product that I wrote type of a thing. As part of it was because there's a lot of great writers out there, but if no one reads your work, they don't know how well, like they can't admire your talent the same way. So I just wanted to write a book to say, I don't care if you read it or not, but I wrote a book. And then it was then I'm like, well, how do I make this kind of kill a couple birds with one stone? So I thought, well, I'll write about Disneyland. I know lots about it. In doing some research for clients and different things, I realized a lot of times there's not a lot of resources out for Disneyland. There's a lot of books out there for Disney World planning, and rightfully so, because it is a beast of a vacation. But for a lot of new clients who've never been to Disneyland before, like they start out going, where do I go? Where do I look for information? There's not a lot out there. So I thought I can fill that void. I know about Disneyland. I love it. And so I can, let's write a book. Let's write about Disneyland and kind of have it as a resource to be able to provide clients or people who are interested in going to Disneyland. And then part of it also is just a collection of all the different emails that I'd written to clients and common questions they've asked. It just gave me an opportunity to kind of collate all that information into one place and say, okay, here in a somewhat easy readable format, this can help guide you with tips and tricks along the way from my own experiences, and kind of all that kind of came together into a book. So yeah,
that is phenomenal. I am like writing notes like a madman. So first and foremost, I just want to hit on a couple things you said. The first one you said is, doesn't matter how good you write if nobody reads it. Well, it doesn't matter how good of an advisor you are if nobody knows you're in business.
Yes.
And right? Like that, just, I'm like, boing.
Yeah.
There were so many nuggets to that. It doesn't matter how good your service is. Like, you can be the best, this, that, the other, but if nobody knows you exist,
yeah,
you're just the best service for your imaginary friends.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I mean, all of us as travel advisors, I mean, we know we can sell the world. Doesn't necessarily mean we're good at all of it, right? Everybody has a different specialty, whether it's destination or type of clientele or just different skills and gifts that they can bring to the table. Be able to show that to people, prospective clients, in a way that makes sense to them why they want to book with an agent, right? Or an advisor to walk them through. It's travel. I mean, like I tell people all the time, it's like there's 10 different ways, more than 10 different ways to book the same trip. How matters, and having somebody there to guide you through that and go through all that is worth every single penny. You're spending a lot of money on a vacation. Doesn't matter, 5,000, 10,000, like whatever your number is, it's a lot of money out of your budget. It's the third most expensive purchase you will make for yourself or your family. Are you going to just trust it to the random internet people or whatever's on the other side, the bots that you Google and look up photos and that kind of stuff? Like you want somebody on your side to make it that much more of a seamless experience.
Look at you dropping all the nuggets. Hello. Third most expensive thing you will spend on yourself or your family. And we are talking behind a house and a car is what I'm going to. Yeah.
Yeah. Generally, right?
And you don't just wake up one morning and say, I'm going to go on the internet, and 30 minutes later, you've bought your house. Okay. Maybe there's one or two out there that do that, but there's probably some that want to do a little research. They want to know what the neighborhood is. They want to know what the options are. They're going to have to look up interest rates. They're going to have to look up this and that and everything else, in which case they're like, I'm going to go find a realtor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet we so often in the travel community, we're like, they're just going to go book online. Well, I mentioned her Disneyland book's almost 200 pages. I haven't yet told you her Disney World is almost 300. So to me, if I got that as a consumer, I'd be like, and the professional would be where? Because like, that's a lot. But the other two nuggets I want to hit on is you said filling the void. And that was so important, that there was a gap in there. Nobody was talking about Disneyland. So you filled the void. The same is true when you're also looking to to choose a niche for your business.
Yes.
Because if you are just shouting out into like this super crowded room and you're like, hey, I have this, nobody's going to hear you, because all they hear is and they all stop listening. But when you fill a void, when you look at the potential marketplace and say, okay, what is my zone of genius? Maybe you're a former teacher. Oh, my favorite are the kindergarten teachers, because they can herd kittens like nobody's business.
Oh, yes.
So the multi-gen world needs you.
Yes.
Because when they're dealing with so many different personalities, and let's be honest, when that multi-generation family gets where all the siblings are in their 40s and other such, and they all have their kids who potentially might be starting to have their kids. And then you got grandma and grandpa at the top, you're back to herding those little kindergartners again.
Yes.
Because their opinions and emotions and sometimes dysregulation from all their life stresses are just as intense as what they were when they were 5.
Sure, of course, yes.
So it's figuring out what are those things that you bring to the table, and where is there a gap in the market?
Yeah.
When people say, oh, there is no gap, there's nothing there. Well, then why did Virgin Voyages come into play? That's a whole new segment that they're opening up.
Yeah.
Riverside River Cruises just came into play. You know, we've got suppliers that are coming in and they are finding the void. They're filling the void. They're filling the gap.
Yeah.
If you aren't yet getting clients yet, we're not talking Disney in this scenario. We're talking find the gap that aligns with your expertise. And your expertise does not necessarily have to be in travel. Maybe you were an event planner. Well, then maybe groups might be your thing, because you can pull things together. Maybe who knows? Like, who absolutely knows? There's so many different things.
Well, exactly. And that's where it's like you can fill voids, you can, or you can flip it into create the opportunity, right? You don't have to look for the gaps if you can't find it, but see the opportunities. Like you said, if there's an event planner, or there's a lot of there are a lot of people with different skills and gifts and organizational abilities that are, you know, beyond just spreadsheets. Like some people are just super organized and can manage the logistics of groups or different multi-gen families and all those things. Those are transferable skills into travel that you can, specialize in multi-generational travel, or specialize in groups. And it doesn't have to be a destination wedding or anything, right? Like it can be any kind of group, or infinity groups we're always hearing about that create those opportunities. Look for them and make them your own.
And keep an ear out, because when you ask, they will tell you. but you have to know what you're listening for.
Yes.
That's a big part of it. So now something too. So this was part of the conversation in the emails that we had going back and forth. Because I said to Renee, I said, we have to be really careful because I don't want travel advisors going, well, in order to do this, I got to go write a 200 or 300 page book. That's not what we're saying.
No.
And so that brings me to the third nugget that you left or dropped earlier, and that's gathering what you've already done. So if you're looking to create a small PDF, you're looking to create a checklist, I just come off of a Travel Pro Summit where the whole week was all these different topics and the automation day. Okay, that day just like blew my socks off when they were showing me that, like showing advisors, and I know I can translate it into my business, that when you repeat the same activities and get interrupted by all these activities, you're giving up 4 to 6 weeks a year of productivity. And I went, holy smokes, in the span of 10 years, because I plan to be around a while, that's an entire year worth of work that's been wasted. And so a lot of travel advisors, because in the marketing world and everything you hear, you got to have your lead magnet, you got to have this. And then they sit down and they're like, oh, what am I going to write? Or what am I going to do? And then I hear these same advisors 2 years later, like, I'm still working on it. So one, we're not saying write a book.
No.
But what we are saying is you need something that's going to fill the void, that's going to get their attention. And I loved when you said, I gathered up the things I'm already said, already used, already written, like those emails that you've already sent out to your clients. I loved that. Crowdsource within your own world of content. In fact, my suggestion is when you write an email, copy and paste that content into a Google Doc. And just label it, like have a folder, and maybe you do Disney trips, maybe you do river cruise, whatever it is. And if it's tied to a specific thing, the nugget that you put in there, copy and paste into that folder inside your Google Doc. And then one day when you are sitting down, whether that be for social media content, whether that be for building a lead magnet, whatever it is, you've already got it in there. We're going to have an upcoming episode all about automation, and that same folder is going to become a really important nugget with that part of it too. But I loved when you said you wrote a book partially using things you've already done. You didn't have to rewrite your story. You just started pulling in what you already had.
Yeah. Well, because a lot of the stuff, again, as advisors, especially if we're selling different parts of the world, different destinations, the information doesn't change. What you pack to Mexico or to an all-inclusive, like that type of stuff. Or in this case, Disney, a lot of it, there you know what changes, but the core part of the vacation planning doesn't. So yeah, like take what you already have, build that library, and then reuse or repurpose it in different ways to make life easier for yourself. So you're not starting from scratch every single time, because who has time for that?
Right now. And it's funny, you just said something that's going to make me chase another squirrel. Because we're both Canadian.
Right.
And so when you were saying like the things you need to pack for all inclusive, I'm like, wait, subject line just hit my brain for every Canadian client out there and half of the US, I'm sure. Subject line the day or two before should be, you need to pack twice as much sunblock as you thought you did and double it again. And that should just be the subject line before you're wishing them off.
Yeah, if you want to have a good trip, this is the most important thing.
Right.
Because so true.
So moving on, I want to talk about your second book.
Okay.
And that one is all on Disney World. Like I said, it's almost 300 pages. Adventure is out there. 101 tips to plan your Walt Disney vacation. Okay. These tips are unlike anything I've seen elsewhere. And for these tips alone, I'm just going to tell advisors, you need to all like not walk, but like run and go grab both of these books. So one of the tips that's in there was talking, I think it might've been the Rainforest Cafe. There's more than one location. So she's talking about the one in this location is in the public area. It was like Disney Springs.
Disney Springs. Yeah.
So you don't need a pass to go there.
No.
And then there's one inside of Animal Kingdom, and that requires a pass. So if this is something you really want to visit or your clients really want to visit, make your reservation at the one inside of Animal Kingdom, because the likelihood of getting a reservation is so much higher. And another tip with that was if you're traveling with a large group, and let's be honest, with Disney, that happens
Tends to be.
frequently.
Yes.
Adjust the time. Don't try to go at those peak breakfast, lunch, and
Right.
dinner. Go for an early breakfast or a late breakfast, early lunch. Hit those shoulder times. Now, second bonus, and she did not include this in here, at least not with that tip. If you have people, so this was my favorite tip at Disneyland. We would have supper at 4:00 off site every night.
Okay.
Because when we went back to the park at 5:00, all those screaming, crying babies that are overtired, overheated, everything else are all exiting the park to go get their suppers. And so there is actually a little bit of a lull between, say, like 5:15 and 6:30 while everybody else is eating supper. So if you have an early supper, you already have it in you. And then you can go back to the park and there's actually shorter rides than what there is, say, at that 3-4 o'clock period.
Oh, for
And
sure.
all the screaming babies are gone when you go back.
Yeah, it's for sure. Well, that's the other, I don't know if I had it in the book or not, or I don't remember, but like the same type of idea is planning it towards like popular show times or parades, because again, everybody is lined up to go watch a show or watch a parade where, okay, we'll go eat at 3:15 or something, because there'll be a lot more availability. And the other thing that I have come across with clients when they talk to, like, they can't imagine eating at 3:15 because that's in the middle of the afternoon. But again, from the West, and you're going to Florida, it's 2 hours ahead. So 3:15 is 1:15 our time. Like, is it that different? Really? I mean, yes, there's a period of adjustment to the time zone there, but at the same time, we stay on our own time zone a little bit too, or kids do particularly, right? So some of those things are just flipping the switch on how you see it, because 3:15 their time just means so many different things. That just, I don't want people to get caught up in the little details of that when they're looking at overall experiences of their trip.
And actually tagging on to that, when you travel with kids, it can get expensive to feed them.
Yes.
So my suggestion is, and it's not even one, okay, so in full disclosure, I'm ADHD and I snack a lot, but when I'm fully stimulated and having a good time, I stop snacking. I didn't know until recently that's what the trigger was. Cause I'm like, when I travel, I never eat. Like, it's crazy. I lose so much weight when I travel. And then I come home and I'm like, I'm bored. Let's just eat. And I'm like, how did we eat? Like, what the heck? And it turns out that that's actually what it is. But with it, we have found that we do a really good breakfast in the mornings. And then we either get a snack at the park, or I would pack like granola bars or something. And actually I pack granola bars all the time anyways, just so you can keep the hangries out of the kids and whatnot when you travel, and out of my dad,
sure.
out of the kids and the seniors. And then you've got that. And so we would have like a really, really good breakfast. We would then have a snack, and then we have an early supper. And then sometimes we would have a granola bar or something just before bed, just to kind of get us through the night. But what it meant is we were only buying 2 meals. And then we would just have something light in between. Because when you're in Disneyland, and this may be the reason I love Disneyland over Disney World. In Disneyland, they have the best churros like everywhere.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like,
you want to have all the snacks. You have to.
And so it doesn't matter if I ate 3 big meals, I'm still having a churro. So which case, when you stagger those meals, and this becomes a tip to give your clients. Now, if they take that tip, great. If not, they still go, oh, what a great way of looking at it. I love your insight. Instantly, these insights, and this is why I'm saying don't walk, run to grab these books if you want to sell Disney, because these little tips, being able to tell your client, there's 2 rainforest cafes. If this is something that you want to hit, I'm going to suggest we book you here, because it's going to be so much easier to get you a reservation, and it probably won't be as crowded as the one in Disney Springs, and things like that. Instantly, you look like a rock star. And it's just little tips like this. So now, in that same light, my question for you, because we all hear, don't give away your best stuff for free. Now, obviously, they have to pay for a book, but the reality is, if it's a $30 book, that's still free to me, like, what's $30 if you can plan out all of this? So when you were writing it, Did you ever worry that your clients would just take it and run, or even that other advisors would take it and, maybe they might quote unquote steal your clients from you because now they can become a rock star too?
I don't like that mindset. I mean, this is where all the information in the book can be found online if you really wanted to. Because a lot, especially for Disney World, a lot of it's just because of the size and the nature of the vacation, a lot of it is somewhere. So in the books, I mean, a lot of the information for Disney can be found if you want to Google it somewhere. The point is somewhere. So I've collated it all into one place and then put my own spin on it as well, with either my own experiences with it or through planning trips with other people. If someone wants to take it and read it and go plan it on their own, then by all means, good luck, go right ahead. No hard feelings. I'm glad that it was helpful. That's kind of how I see it. Or same with an agent. I mean, ideally, again, Disney World and Disneyland, these are big ticket vacations. The most heartbreaking thing for me is somebody who didn't know anything, paid all that money, went, and then go, I wish I'd known that. I wish I'd known that. I wish I'd known that. Or, complaining about all these things that happened, where if you had a strategy ahead of time, or you had some of these tips, or you had someone guiding you that can just make the experience a little bit more seamless, or a little bit more, or take the edge off, or even just things like, I had no idea going on Christmas Day that it was so busy and it's the busiest day of the year. Well, okay, if you had somebody can tell you these things, that you would, then you can kind of manage the expectations too. So I find that, again, if someone wants to go ahead and take it, go right ahead. I mean, it doesn't bother me, but in the sense that, if you're going to read it and you want the information, I am sure there's going to be more questions that come out of it, and having somebody to ask and guide you through it specifically for your family or your situation, that's where we show our expertise, is what we bring to the table for that client, because that client's going to be different than a different client and a different family. And the information is the same, but it's your answers to them and what their concerns, their questions, their needs, that will be different. And that's where the value of having a travel agent, a specific travel agent. So again, it could be me, or, I mean, I'm just as happy as if somebody chose to book with another agent versus booking themselves, because that, again, what's good for one agent is good for the whole agent industry, right? So
love it. I loved, like, when I was on mute there for a second because I was taking a quick drink, but we were like, I really don't like that mindset. I'm like, God.
Because like there's a lot of us, home-based travel agents working tirelessly behind the computer, nameless, faceless type of a thing that no one sees. But work doesn't necessarily mean that we're working any less hard, or we're working just as long hours as everybody else. And again, a lot of people don't necessarily know that or see that. Yeah. So anything we can do to help elevate the industry so people know about that, I think is a win. Secondly, I think there's a lot of travel agents out there, but there's also a lot of clients, and there's more than enough business for anybody and everybody to tap into that a little bit. Find your niche, find your market, find your people. And you don't have to worry about other people stealing from other agents. And there's so many different ways to book a trip, and travel is one of those things that I think people, once you've had a taste of it, they will travel again and again and again, because it's one of life's greatest pleasures.
Yep, absolutely. Now, and of course, we are making a couple of assumptions in here. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to make sure, because I made a couple of those assumptions when I was doing a speaking panel recently, and I was talking about creating swipe files and getting ideas and inspiration, things like that. And somebody's like, but they can't just copy. We're also talking about travel advisors, because if they're listening to my podcast, I know they work in integrity, because that's just how we roll around here. Mm-hmm. And so, no, I'm not going to say go through Renee's book, read it, and then create word for word a blog based on it. It's, you can use it for your own inspiration and be like, okay, wow, I just learned this. Or, There's certain things that working with a travel advisor, you're going to get. Like maybe it's knowing which restaurant or which location of a restaurant is going to give you the best reservations. That's something I can help you with. This and that. But you're not necessarily going to take a word for word of what she said, but you can use it for inspiration to create your own content, to help your clients and things like that. And so just so that we're 100% clear, I totally get if you're listening to us right now, you're one of those advisors that works in integrity. And thank you. One thing I did find on your blog, though, is that you were talking about the dedication of your book and that your kids were disappointed that it wasn't dedicated to them. But I loved what you said. You said it was dedicated to the reader. And I love that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that part of it?
Okay. I would love to, because I mean, again, initially in the beginning, when I was the book writing process and kind of delving into that, and there's all these standard parts of the book, and a dedication is important, and a lot of people have that. And there are different, I mean, I would dedicate to my kids or to my family or that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I thought this book, even though I wrote it, and it's about my experiences through travel, through as a travel agent, and how I can guide people through trips. Yeah, I wanted to make it for the reader and dedicate it to the reader. Because again, the whole goal of this was to make the experience for someone visiting going to Disney. Doesn't matter, Disneyland, Disney World. It comes down to you're spending a lot of money. You're there to want to make magical experiences. This is a bucket list trip. There's so many more moving parts to it that I want to help, whatever I can do to help make it that much more magical, right? Useful, easy. That was the goal. That's where I wanted to kind of, again, shift things a little bit so that it's not about me. It's never about me. It's about you. So
I love it. And I think that's a big one too. A lot of times when we're creating our marketing or we're creating things, we think it's about us. And it's not. It's always about the person that's going to be on the receiving end. Or at the very least, we need to be thinking about them. Because people don't care about anybody other than themselves if we really get down to the core. The first instinct is, how will this affect me? And once they get past how will it affect me, then they can get it into how will it affect those that are around us. And so when we write something, when we create something, when we put something out, it always needs to be with that intended user, that person on the other end that receives it. And I just really love the fact that not only did you do it that way, but that you highlighted that in your blog article, because I thought that spoke volumes. And in one of the emails that we shared back and forth, you just said, I wrote it because I want everybody to have the best experience. Nothing would be more crushing to me than if people got back from an experience, whether I booked them or somebody else did, and they went, wait, I didn't even know that was an option.
Yeah.
They've spent thousands of dollars to do these vacations to come home and say, oh, well, it wasn't as good as I thought it would be because I missed out. And so I love that was a real driving force for you in writing it. Now, one thing I also wanted to touch on, of course, I've seen you on the local news. And I've seen you pop up on there. I've seen articles where you shared video and other such. So I want to touch a little bit because, again, we're not saying you got to run out and write a book. That's a whole different thing and whatnot. But it obviously gave you a lot of authority with your clients. And I think one of the things we talked about earlier is when your clients book their planning fee or pay their planning fee, you give them a book as part of it, which is included in how she chooses her price, I'm sure. But then they get that to kind of get things warmed up and excited and whatnot. So one tip to that would be, especially if you are very niched and you sell a specific sort of thing, it's great to give them something to kind of dig their teeth into that, for lack of a better term, because I'm not sure how else to say it, but that you control the content that they're getting while you're in the process of putting their proposal together. But I also want to talk about, you've been on the news. What are some of the, first off, for an advisor who's like, well, good for her, I could never do that. Let's talk about that. How did that come to be? And what advice would you give for another advisor that's kind of looking into that?
Well, I mean, those were just different opportunities that have come up over the past years of just my experiences as highlighting the authority and the credibility that I have as a travel advisor. I think what's important is if you don't tell people what you do, people don't know. So especially as us as independent, like I said, independent, working at home behind a computer, faceless, nameless, people don't know we exist until you tell them to. And they don't know your successes and your achievements unless you tell people to. So some of that was just different things of just over in the past of connections who have seen some of the things that I've done that kind of brought me to different reporters when they do stories and they need a soundbite for a travel story or a segment, or just kind of, being able to provide that trusted authority, expertise role that I'm happy to always share, happy to kind of just give that attention, because like I said, anything that any travel advisor does that's good and is good for the agent, it's good for the whole industry as a whole, because we're all working just as hard. Just we need to tell people about it or else clients don't know. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And, over the last few years, I've seen a whole lot more travel advisors popping up on the daily news shows and things like that. So I'm going to chase another squirrel here for a second. And the first thing I want to say is nobody or very few people wake up in the morning and say, I am camera perfection. No. Instead, there's probably a lot of self-doubt and a lot of, I wish I would have got my hair touched up, or all of these sorts of things that prevent us from taking that leap. What would you say to people that are like, oh, that's good for you. I have a voice for radio, not a face for TV.
Oh, I mean, don't overthink it. I certainly don't. I mean, I have my insecurities just like everybody else. I'm not camera ready, or, even just talking about things. I mean, I'm not the most eloquent or person in sometimes in answering questions, but at the same time with everything is just go for it. Do it. If an opportunity arises, take it and see where it leads you to. With these different opportunities, like with writing the book, allowed me to showcase the credibility, a level of authority that I think gave people, just again, if they didn't want to read the book, they don't have to. It's 300 pages. I totally get it if you don't read the whole thing. But for an outsider looking in, okay, there's a book there. There's definitely a level of authority and credibility that's kind of built in that people trust in a sense. So I think whatever you can do to make sure you highlight that for other people, for prospective people to see, can create different opportunities that you never know what will happen, and you just have to go for it. Jump in.
Love it. And there's so many other ways that you can create authority. I was just reading a book recently here. I think it's called Shark Tales. It's the Barbara Corcoran story. She wrote it quite a few years ago. So it was a different era, if you will, when she wrote it. But it was really, for me, it was the meat and potatoes of how she built her real estate empire in the early 80s and everything that went on through there. And she was noticing that other people, particularly men, were getting attention in like the Wall Street Journal and places like that, like the big, this is, when you've made it. So she had somebody that told her, then write the Corcoran report. And so she went based on her stats. What were things selling for? What were this, that, the other? And she published a 1-page Corcoran report. And so it went out, and, it goes on to say, she talks about when she was put out the most expensive real estate, and Trump was not a part of it. I think it was the Plaza Hotel at the time or something like that. I can't quite remember. He summoned her to the office. Like, this is in the early 80s. Like, how dare you? And so she writes all about that part of it. And so how she reworked it. But the thing is that the Corcoran report, I think there was only 22 properties that were actually a part of the statistics that made up the first Corcoran report. So who's to say you can't make your own report of what's been hot in your agency? What is the number one booked thing you've done this year? What are the things that are going to do it? I've started putting out, and I got to finish it, putting out what's been the top downloaded podcasts. Because that's a stat that I have access to, and it allows me to put it out. Do you want to know something interesting? The first time I put out what are our top downloaded podcasts, instantly my podcast downloads went up because one, people were looking for ones they hadn't listened to yet.
Yeah.
Two, other people were like, wait, you have a podcast? And three, I had people who were like, you know what? That's a good reminder. I want to go back and listen to that one
Yeah.
again.
Yes.
And so all I did was I took a quick snapshot of the things that were already happening in my business.
Mm-hmm.
And boom, it went up. And I had done it based on the last 30 days. The one I'm working on right now that I meant to do a couple days ago, but it's been crazy, is going to be on the last 90 days. And so that I can get a little bit more variety rather than just what was, because most recent is always going to be the most downloaded.
Yeah.
So I want to do last 90 days and see what that's going to be. And as we head towards the end of the year, because we're recording this in December, we're going to be doing what was the top downloaded in the whole year. And maybe we'll even do a countdown as we go or something like that. But I'm super excited because this quote unquote report triggers people to think about things differently.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to create, even if it's your own report, you start to change your level of authority. And so that's a whole lot easier to do than writing a book.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But a book, a report, getting on the news, having a good lead magnet, those are all elements of establishing your authority in the industry that you want to be known in.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I mean, I think a lot of that too is people need to be hearing the same things over and over and over before it sinks in. So for us as agents, maybe we know so much about Mexico. We're tired of hearing ourselves talk about it. And we think we sort of assume or forget that people may not know this. So if you just keep repeating the same information or giving the same tips about a destination, then you become that authority in that because, oh, look at all this wonderful content this agent is sharing about a destination or a type of travel that there's an authority right there.
Right. And for those that might be newer and saying, but I don't have all this, pick a destination you want to go to, do some research on it. What are the top cities that are most visited? Maybe you want to be known for selling Switzerland or Europe or whatever it is. Find something interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the 10 best cities you've never heard of in Europe. And that these are off the beaten trail. Something that's going to do it. And then just put out that report, put out something that's going to capture their attention, something that's going to make them go, wait, this person knows what they're talking about. Maybe you want to be known as the person who does the best Christmas markets tours in Europe or around the world. So then in which case, maybe you're going to list all throughout the rest of the year, some of the best Christmas decoration shops around the world, like whatever it is, fill that void. Find that void and fill it because there are people out there that would love what you have. But if nobody ever sees it, if nobody ever knows you're in business, it doesn't matter how good you are. You're not going to be able to sell anything.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So just before we wrap up here, I again just want to go over these books again. We have Disneyland, I'll Never Grow Up, The Bare Necessities of Planning Your Disneyland Vacation. And The Adventure is Out There, 101 Tips to Plan Your Walt Disney World Vacation by Renee Tsang. Love this. These are fabulous. If you want to sell more Disney, or if you're feeling like maybe you're already selling lots of it, but you just feel like you're still missing something, go grab these books. They are phenomenal resources. I will have mine all flagged out and everything else just for when I go travel on my next one. But as I am winding down selling my travel, I'm going to tell you flat out, I'm not booking it myself. I'm going to give Renee a call and she's going to be taking care of it because she is a wealth of knowledge. And the thing I really hope comes through today is that you as the listener have a wealth of knowledge inside of you and have the ability to build a wealth of knowledge. Don't just sit on it. Make sure other people know that you exist because it doesn't matter how good you write if nobody reads it. And I love that. I think that will probably be the absolute quote of this episode. Thank you so much for joining me, Renee. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, this has been wonderful. Thank you for inviting me and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Fabulous. Until next time, guys, happy selling.